good evening, and welcome to another episode of Fresh Natural Live. You may know that we've been away for 2 weeks. We've been in YouTube jail for telling the truth. However, we'll continue to work hard to tell the truth. We'll just try to do it in a way that is more politically correct. But be that as it may, we have a wonderful show for you tonight. As usual, we're going to talk about the whole concept of negative news videos. So, negative news, what should you know? How can it affect you emotionally? How can it impact your life? And is there a benefit? We're going to try to present a balanced side to this. I mean, a hurricane coming or, bad weather storm, coming. That's negative news, but that's beneficial news. And so, not all negative news could be a bad thing. So we're going to try to look at this from a balanced perspective and say, okay, negative news, which is good, which is bad. Do we need to strike more of a balance? Do we as individuals, the news consuming public or entertainment consuming public, do we need to come up with a strategy of creating our own balance? The media may have a certain formula for which they think is ideal from the standpoint of selling more eyeballs and the like. Do we need to create a formula of our own? So we're going to try to, discuss this with my colleagues and come up with an approach and some suggestions that may be helpful. So I look forward to seeing you on the other side. So let's go to the intro, and I'll get started shortly. Okay, here we go. So another show. Again, we're back from YouTube jail, and we have a great show for you tonight, as usual. We're going to be talking about the concept of negative news, if you will. And I have my friend and colleague here, Dr. Ford Atkins. Hello, Dr. Atkins. How are you this evening?
Oh, I'm doing wonderful. It's good to be out of Monopoly jail.
Exactly. And Dr. Celeste Palmer will be doing the honor of leading our discussion this evening as we talk about this whole concept of negative news. So the whole concept of breaking news, is it breaking our hearts, souls, and minds, or is it breaking other things? What do you have in store for us tonight? What's the whole concept of news?
So just to kind of start out, this is kind of a continuation from last week. Last week we talked about media in general, well, not media, but advertisements, and kind of the impact that advertisements have on our thoughts, our purchasing abilities and powers, and kind of also something that I wanted us to think about, because sometimes we unconsciously are doing things and not knowing why, is kind of our news feeds, what comes into our house every day. I know a lot of people are not watching TV anymore, but it's on our phones, it's on our smartphones, it's on our computers, it's on the news racks. So, our news is also an area that we need to think about and look at as far as it goes with our mental health and kind of what we're seeing. So we're talking about, let me go over. Our negative news is what we're talking about, that we see a lot of. And I think many people, most of us will agree, and we're very familiar with kind of the direction that the news has gone in the last probably 15 years. And then with the emphasis over the last couple of years of it being even more exaggerated. So let's get into it. If it bleeds, it leads. That's a saying that journalists often use, and actually was coined probably back in the 1890s, I think the article said. And this was something that was said in relation to war, because it was the American-Spanish War during that time. And they were finding that people were more interested in the violent stories that had to do with war. And people were purchasing power for this information was higher. So the saying was, if it bleeds, it leads, as in leading story. And what ended up, as you can, and they still use this saying in today. And so what science has found out, because people are kind of thinking, why are we doing this and why does this happen? And what science has found out is that the public actually has a negativity bias. By definition, we tend to learn more, use negative energy, pay more attention to negativity, far more than we do positive energy. And this is from, an NIH article. This is not Dr. Palmer making this up. Also,
NIH making it up.
Negative bias impacts how we select our news, our form of news, and how we're going to watch it, and also how that news is produced and how it's made, and our view of our current environment. So as you can see in this little picture over here, the heart is looking at all of the good things in the room, and the brain is concentrating on that one bad ball that's sitting there. So, negative news, the truth about it, though, is that it sells. And this is what we've shown, and they've shown, and they know. It is more psychologically stimulating and activating. A lot of times the news is written in such a way that they'll give you a headline that asks a question, and it kind of makes it seem like by the end of the news story you'll have the answer. So it's one of those, it's kind of mystery, and it's kind of fun, because they may say, at the beginning of the news story, what's in your tap? And so you want to listen to that so you can find out what is in your tap water, for example. That's just an example. Negative news catches our attention. As we can say, you can be very dramatic with it. There's a lot of rhythm to it. So a lot of times when you hear these stories, they have the music going, and it's kind of dun, dun, dun. Not exactly like that, but you know what I mean. There's certain words that they use. There's a format. So that tap story that they announce at the beginning of the news to get you to start watching it, it probably won't come until the last story in the news to get you to watch the whole 30 minutes of news. We know that they give us teasers, headlines, and they also now are giving us the crawl. So the banner at the bottom of the news, that while you're watching a story, they have additional news going at the bottom of the screen. So this can be overwhelming, especially when it's usually things that are going at the bottom of the screen are not the best information either. But what we have to realize is that this puts the reporter in control of what they want you to think and how they want you to think. And then they can sway your thoughts in whichever direction that they want to sway it in. Also, we know that negative news travels pretty fast. You hear something in one space, and especially now with us having an internet connection to the world and having our cell phones, something happens one day and it's traveled out around the world. I don't know how quickly, but we know that news travels fast now. Bad news travels even faster. So even though we say that we want positive news, it's been shown that we really don't. The negative news is just what really sells. And they actually did an experiment overseas with a website where they posted only positive stories for 24 hours. And that website lost 66% of its readership on that day.
Wow.
So with the internet and social media sites now, they can track what people are looking at. So the most read and shared social media platforms are the negative ones. Is that me?
It's not me.
Okay.
That was me. I'm sorry.
Okay. So basically, media, in media's defense, media is saying they are responding to consumer demand. This is what the audience wants, and this is what they are giving. So news outlets are a business. So increased ratings equals increased viewership equals increased advertising dollars and investments. And so this is what has happened in the past. I think reporters were more focused on making sure that they gave a balanced story, but it's kind of been changed a little bit by financial incentives. Also, there's availability bias. In addition to the negativity bias, the brain is more likely to remember bad stories. And there's also confirmation bias. We usually seek and confirm things that we already believe or we already know. And we see this in what's happening now. We have different cable news stations, and we know certain people in certain areas watch one station all the time and others watch another station all the time. And we all are very much aware of this. There's a newer term called doom scrolling or doom surfing. And this is, again, not something made up by Dr. Palmer, but it's the act of spending excessive amount of time on your screen absorbing negative news. So this is not something that we consciously do. We don't consciously seek negative news necessarily. It's kind of an unconscious adaptation or learned tendency to prioritize negative information. So number one may be a little bit bad, 2 may be very bad, and 3 is going to be worse. So we just kind of put everything we have a tendency to see things now as the glass is half empty. And so why is that? And so there are a couple of theories. Evolutionary theory says we do this as a form of survival. So that way, if we see negative information on the screen or on our phones, then it helps us to avoid that type of a negative outcome. That the human brain is wired in this type of way to protect us is one theory. And another theory is, which is true also, is entertaining. It's kind of like sophisticated gossip. It basically, positive news is viewed as boring and negative news is viewed as exciting. And this is not just in the United States, this is across the world. PNAS, which is Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, did a study, and they found they took people from 17 different countries, 6 different continents, in the same result. The more negative, the more popular the information is. So let's just look at some statistics. We have 95% of media headlines are sensationalized. And this is an article as of 2021. So they blow it a little bit or a lot out of proportion in order to manipulate our viewers' emotions. Studies have shown that approximately 1 in 10 Americans check their phone or check some kind of form of media every hour. About 20% of Americans are constantly monitoring social media feeds. So that's just not news. But the way our phones and computers are set up now is that if you are looking at something, then your computer or your phone is tracking what you're looking at. So it's going to send you more of that. So you just keep getting more and more of the same type of negative information if you started looking at something negative. Words is bad, worse, and never are 30% more effective in catching attention. So it improves the average clicks. And as I said, this is being tracked so they can see how many clicks websites get. And those with the words bad, worse, and never get more clicks. And I was going to put that in our title today, but I was like, no, that would be too cliche.
Bad news, bad
Headline manipulation, devil's readership, and also that they have also shown that when the 65% of news organizations ignore the mistakes that they make. So they may rush a story out and not have all of the facts, but they still want to be the first channel or outlet to get that information out. And they may knowingly or maybe not knowingly make mistakes, but rarely do they come back and correct those mistakes. And that is a known practice also. 26.7% of people are exposed to being exposed to this negative news develops anxiety. 79% of companies do have a bias for their advertisers also. People are 49% more likely to read something when it's presented in a negative manner. And 79% of Americans believe that media is not balanced. So the consequence of all of this overwhelming negativity means that a lot of times Americans or citizens, I'm not scratch Americans, people are receiving inadequate news or incorrect knowledge. And that makes them, at the end of the day, say, forget it, they become apathetic or they just disengage from the whole scenario. Just to not forget what's happening to our children. So 63% of children between the ages of 12 and 18, these are the teenagers, report that they feel bad, depressed, angry, or even afraid after watching the news. 10 to 12-year-olds, these are our tweens, they are also very susceptible to these negative adverse effects, and 45% of them feel bad. So it's really affecting our children. I'll talk a little bit about that later. 48% of young respondents felt that they need to watch the news. They felt it was important to watch the news. And 70% of them felt like the news actually makes them smarter and more knowledgeable. So they have this understanding that they need to know what's going on in the world. So they feel like they should watch the news. But then when they watch it, they end up feeling bad, depressed, afraid, with all of this negative outcome from seeing the images and hearing what is happening. So this, as I mentioned before, this has been a significant change in the last 15 or 20 years. It was not always like it is right now. And the things that it can exacerbate in people is, of course, worry, hopelessness, and helplessness, because a lot of the things that we're seeing is not a lot that we can individually do about it. Sleeping problems, mood swings, depression or worsening depression, aggression, PTSD type symptoms. Also, it also makes us feel like, our neighborhoods may not be safe. The world is going down. Overestimate or our ability to overestimate that we may actually be caught in the situation that we see. So we become overly cautious and believe that, the crime is everywhere and crime rates are going up. Now, I'm not saying that some of this is not true. We all live in a society where we see different things ourselves, but some of it is exaggerated, and it gives us a negative cloud over the world that we walk around in day to day. So this can cause stress hormones to be released. We know once cortisol starts going up, it creates inflammation in the body, and that could be associated with flaring of arthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, cardiovascular disease, and many other health problems. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, it is very hard on our mental health.
There's you mentioned the desire for the negative news. The question comes to mind, and maybe you saw some of this from a historical perspective. Did you see a point where, you said that some poll was done where I think World War II, where there was a rating or finding that that whole term, if it bleeds, it leads, and they found out that more people wanted negative news. The question in my mind, was there some point prior to that time when there was some process of feeding negativity into our minds via the radio or whatever the case is that led to a greater appetite. Yeah, I'm trying to apply an analogy to, a craving for sugar. You may crave sugar if it's introduced to you in a certain way, and then it creates some high, and that mental high then creates a desire for more sugar. We have that identified, crack cocaine or whatever other chemical. The question is this negative news? Is it somewhat like a chemical, if you will, a psychological chemical that has been fed to us over time, and we as individuals and collectively as society have an addiction to it?
Yeah.
Has anybody done an analysis to that? I mean, in other words, can you break someone's addiction and a desire for this negative news?
Well, that's what this last slide is.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I mean, I think I'm just more so, I have two things to say about that, because I think that, our appetite for negativity has actually been taught to us. And that's why earlier when they said evolutionary theory, I said it is a theory. But I think they know that we have fears and anxieties. And I think our fears and anxieties have been increased over years. And I think they realize that they can feed into that, and that creates more revenue, that creates more money. But how do we get the news without letting it impact our health? So I just put some brief things down here. We want to limit our consumption. So maybe pick a time, 30 minutes or hour once a day. You're going to watch the news and then turn it off. Or you're going to look at something on your phone from one site and then turn it off. They're advised against looking at this information before we go to bed because it can affect your sleep. Printed media may be a little bit safer because you don't have somebody's voice and somebody's emotion behind it. That can also make you feel more nervous or helpless or hopeless, depending on how it's being presented to you. Also, you can turn it off. I mean, you can close the paper and move on, or you can, I guess you can turn your phone off too, but it seems to be more addictive when it's on your phone. We should not expose ourselves to sensationalized negativity for hours a day. And I think we all know that. So I think that's why I wanted to talk about this, because some people are saying, well, I'm just watching the news. And so they feel like it's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. But this is just to kind of scratch the surface and to shine light on what is happening. This is not a full examination of the news, but just to kind of get people aware of what is happening. Also, we want to ask ourselves, how much have we learned? Did we get what we needed? And can we move on? Because we don't need to keep confirming what we already know, right? Because that's just going to create more anxiety, even though we end up doing that a lot when we watch TV. And then we may also set up a news fast. Maybe we do one day, or maybe we do a week where we just turn it off, such that we are not feeling overwhelmed. Can also counteract, after you see something on the news that may be emotionally taxing, do the opposite. Do something positive. Do your outlet. Maybe read a book. Maybe go on a jog. Also, be mindful and intentional about your thoughts. After you see a negative story, think about what that means to you, and and how you're going to move about in your environment. And also, we have to remember, talk to and teach the children. Even though a lot of children are not sitting and watching news or necessarily seeking it on their phones, just like this stuff pops up on our phone, is popping up on their phones because they have phones. They are very much aware of what's going on in the world. They may not understand all the levels of complexity as we don't understand all the levels of complexity, but they are trying to figure out how to maneuver in this world. And this is kind of a new space for all of us. And they don't know how to balance some of this stress. It's a lot of stress on them because I see them daily. So I think we have to be mindful of that and teach ourselves to pull away from this and how to balance it so that we can be able to teach the children how to do that also.
I like those bullet points, the whole being mindful and intentional about your thoughts. I'm going to throw biblical scripture here. I'm not trying to preach to anyone or convert anyone, but I imagine other texts that have this, but I'll throw this up on the screen for people to look at. But in the Bible, the Philippians 4:8 through 9, and I'll read it. Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there is any excellence and if anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things. The things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. So, there's a scriptural thing that there's a biblical foundation, if you will, that speaks to what you're talking about. And, there's some spiritual aspects of that I just read, but there's also a practical aspect. And you read the Bible, it says, and the word became flesh and dwelled among men. So there's a spiritual to a flesh level of all of the advice we get. And there's a practical aspect to this. And we have to, understand that. Even before that, it says, be anxious of nothing but everything in prayer. So you're looking at the news too much, you're very anxious, you need to pray about it. And then you need to start thinking about things that are positive. That's essentially that from, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9 talks about. But I think it's something that we have to be mindful of, and as you point, and intentional about, because the world is loaded with a lot of negativity and things that are trying to fill our minds up with negative thoughts, evil thoughts, etc. And certain negative news is I think okay, perhaps, and maybe I want us to get into that discussion. Or maybe you can pose it as a question. Is a certain amount of negative news important or beneficial, valuable? I'll pose it as a question. We can discuss it later. But I like the bullet points you share because there's some I think some foundational principles in the biblical standpoint, spiritual aspect that supports that, and there's a practicality to that I think is very important as well. Any other comments? I don't know. You have the slides?
No, that's the last slide. Another thing that because we have some videos that we're going to show a little bit, coming up. But in another technique, they use different techniques too, because sometimes I think we don't realize the science that goes behind what they present to us. So they have different techniques. Some of these stations, and maybe all of them do, I don't know, because I didn't really get into reading that much about it, but they hire consultants to write their stories. And the consultants kind of know what sells and what doesn't sell. So, the journalist doesn't actually write the story. And with that, they kind of they can sway it in a negative way. So this is called stunting, or just add water reporting. So they have a consultant write it. Then the person on TV is more like, I guess, an actor. So they present the story in a emotional, a dramatic, rhythmic way to the public. And this is the show, and this is what sells. So keep in mind that technique is being used to present a story in order to keep you on that station, because this is your favorite station, because you love this anchor, or you like this certain thing. Not necessarily the news, but the people also are placed on purpose, and the information is given in a very strategic manner.
Fascinating. So before we go to the break, I just want to throw out a couple of questions or thought process for us to chew on during the break. But one, is negative news? Can negative news be beneficial? Two, if so, what kind of negative news and what kind of strategies can we pose as the listening public to protect ourselves and extract the ideal part of the news that, if we want to assume that some of it is good, extract the good part and leave the negative part. So I'll just put that out there, and I'll get some of my colleagues to comment as we come back from the break.